Okay, great. Well, I think we can get started. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my presentation. So tonight's webinar is Unpacking Dyslexia. And welcome everybody. We are just so happy to have you here tonight. This is our first webinar of the new school year. We do a number of these actually through the school year, and we're just so excited to have you here with us tonight. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here and to discuss this topic with us. We love discussing dyslexia and answering questions and doing whatever we can to help you understand more about that topic and answer your questions. So we're really glad to have you here tonight. My name is Peter Groth. I'm the founder and CEO of Dyslexia Connect Online Tutoring, which I started in 2010. I was trained in the Orton Gillingham method in 2004, and that's a really well-known method for working with kids and adults who have dyslexia to help them improve their reading and spelling. And I worked as a dyslexia tutor for many years, and started Dyslexia Connect online tutoring in 2010. And in total, I have about 21 years of experience working with students who have dyslexia. A little bit more info about Dyslexia Connect. So we provide online dyslexia tutoring based on the Orton Gillingham method to families and to school districts. And if you're interested in learning more about us, you can find us at dyslexiaconnect.com. We also have tons of information on there about dyslexia, so you might find that helpful as well. We offer a free trial with a free tutoring session to anybody who's interested in trying our tutoring out. And it's nice because we do that with no obligation at all. So you can feel free to try our tutoring out and see if it might be something that would fit your needs. So we're not there yet, but I wanted to mention that October is Dyslexia Awareness Month. And so we're coming up on that, and we're going to be posting a lot about dyslexia. We actually post about dyslexia pretty much every weekday on our social media channels. So we would love to have you follow us on there. Lots of different information and things that people find helpful about dyslexia. And we're looking forward to Dyslexia Awareness Month, which is coming up in October. We're going to be hosting a dyslexia simulation in October, on October 15th at 6 p.m. Central Time. This is a really great event. I think this is going to be the third year that we are doing this event, and it's really a lot of fun and really interesting. We get a lot of great questions. And if you're ever wondering what it feels like for a child to have dyslexia when they're trying to read and spell, I think you'd really find this webinar interesting. And it's free, like all of our webinars are. And we are providing a professional development certificate to any teachers who would like to earn a professional development hour for that webinar as well. So Katie's going to put that link in the chat if you'd like to sign up for that. And we're really excited about doing that. Would love to have you join us if you would like to join us. I thought I would go over some objectives for today. So we're going to do the presentation. That will probably last about 30 minutes. And then we will also have about 30 minutes for questions and answers. And I'm going to start today by talking about Oscar, a student who I worked with, and his story of dyslexia. I'm going to provide a definition of dyslexia, talk about some people we know who are pretty well known who have dyslexia, talk about dyslexia symptoms, how we test for dyslexia to see if somebody has it, effective instructional methods to help people with dyslexia learn to read and spell, accommodations that are often used in school for dyslexia. We'll talk about some dyslexia strengths, and then we'll have the question and answer session. And I'm very happy to be joined today by Katie and Natalie from the Dyslexia Connect admin staff. And they are both former teachers, dyslexia tutors. They have a wealth of education and knowledge about dyslexia and teaching. And they're going to be here to help answer your questions today. And you can submit questions at any time during the webinar using the Zoom chat. And if you're able to, we would like to ask that you select the Everyone tab when you submit a question via chat. And when you use the Everyone tab, that means that everybody in the webinar will be able to see your question. So I'll be able to see it, Katie and Natalie will be able to, and also all of the attendees with us today will also be able to see it. And that's really great because a lot of other people may have the same question that you have. And if you use that Everyone tab, then everybody is able to see the responses and see the question and maybe get their questions answered quickly as well. If you wouldn't mind, we'd also like you to include your role when you ask a question. So, for example, if you're a teacher, you can just mention that you're a teacher in your question, or if you're the parent of a student with dyslexia, you can mention that. And if you're able to provide us with that info, it helps us to tailor our responses to you as best as possible so that hopefully we can give you the most relevant information that will be most helpful to you. We are recording the webinar tonight, and there's going to be a recording available of this that we'll be sending out by email to everyone who registered. So since you're registered and here tonight, you will be receiving a recording of this via email in case you want to rewatch the whole thing or rewatch parts of it and whatever you want to do with that. As I mentioned, one of the great things actually about using that Everyone tab in the chat to ask questions is that our attendees are also able to provide great info. One of the reasons why I really love doing these webinars is that we get a lot of people together who have a great amount of knowledge and education and experience around dyslexia, and we're able to educate each other and help to answer each other's questions, which is really cool and really useful. So when you use that Everyone tab to ask your question, it's possible that other attendees will be able to provide great information that you will find useful. As mentioned, we're providing a professional development certificate for this webinar tonight. And this is available to anyone who attends the full live webinar with us tonight. And if you would like a professional development certificate, please contact us from our website, which is dyslexiaconnect.com. And you can click on any of the buttons that say free trial because that will pull up our contact form. Or you can also use the contact page, which has a contact form on it as well. So use any of those contact forms to send us a message, and then we can discuss the professional development certificate with you. Unfortunately, we are not able to provide a certificate in response to requests in the chat during the webinar. So if you would like a professional development certificate, please go onto our website, dyslexiaconnect.com, and hit any of those free trial or contact page buttons, and then you can request one from there. Well, I'd like to start by talking about Oscar, a student who I worked with, who I provided tutoring to. When I started working with Oscar, he was in seventh grade. He had been in tutoring for several years at that point, different types of tutoring, and he was just really starting to shut down. He was not invested in tutoring, didn't want to be there, didn't want to be at school. Felt like there was something going on with him, but he didn't really understand what that was. And another tutor I know actually contacted me and asked if I'd be able to try working with Oscar. I think she had been discussing Oscar's musical taste with him, and she thought like, oh, Peter might connect with him over this or something else. And so she asked if I could try working with him and see if I'd be able to get some results with him. And he at that point, he was in seventh grade. He had a lot of difficulty reading second grade material, and he often struggled with reading even 3 or 4 letter words. He's also one of the most intelligent students I've ever worked with. So the question, of course, is what's going on here? Well, the answer is dyslexia. Oscar had very severe dyslexia, and this was causing problems with his reading and spelling. And I thought I would provide a definition of dyslexia. This is from the International Dyslexia Association, and it's a pretty good definition, and so I like to use it in different webinars sometimes. It states that dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurobiological in origin. It is characterized by difficulties with accurate and or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. Secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that can impede growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. So that's a that's a good definition of dyslexia, which is why I like to use it sometimes. So who has dyslexia? Well, it's estimated that up to 5 to 10% of the world's population might have dyslexia. So when we think about that in reference to the United States, which I think has about 340 or 350 million people, if we consider 5 to 10% of that, that's a lot of people who have dyslexia. So who has dyslexia? Well, there are some really famous people, actually. There are a lot of famous people who have dyslexia. And we see really successful people with dyslexia in every career field. So Richard Branson, of course, is a very famous entrepreneur. He's also very outspoken about his dyslexia and does a lot of work to raise dyslexia awareness. Oscar-winning actress Octavia Spencer also has dyslexia. Steve Jobs, the famous CEO of Apple, had dyslexia. Damon John, who is founder of the FUBU clothing company and is also a regular member of the Shark Tank investor crew, has dyslexia. Famous director Steven Spielberg has dyslexia. Actress Jennifer Aniston has dyslexia. Whoopi Goldberg has dyslexia. So there are a lot of different people that have dyslexia across the entire spectrum of careers, which is really interesting. So I thought we'd talk about Oscar's dyslexia symptoms here, his specific symptoms. So Oscar had a lot of trouble learning letter names and remembering the sounds they make. And I should mention that these are all very typical symptoms of dyslexia that Oscar was struggling with. He was confusing letters that look similar, like B, D, P, and Q. When we think about those letters all look the same, except they're rotated. Those can be really tough for kids with dyslexia. He often struggled with reading familiar words like cat or the, especially if there weren't any pictures. He would substitute words a lot when reading aloud, like saying house when the story said home. And the interesting thing about this is that we often see students with dyslexia use synonyms that are actually bigger and more difficult words for the words that are actually printed on the page that they're reading, which is really interesting. So I think there's something interesting about that and how the mind with dyslexia works because they may see the word, but they'll insert a synonym that's actually a much more difficult word to read, much more difficult word to use instead of that word. Trouble hearing the individual sounds in words and blending sounds to make a word. Trouble remembering how words are spelled and applying spelling rules in writing. Here are some more dyslexia symptoms that are really pretty common. Confusing or skipping small words like for or of when reading aloud. Spelling the same word correctly and incorrectly in the same exercise. Avoiding reading whenever possible or getting frustrated or upset when reading. Constant struggles with reading accuracy. And as you can imagine, if a student is struggling with reading accuracy, then they're going to be struggling with reading comprehension as well, because if you aren't able to read the words accurately, then you're going to have a hard time determining what the content is. Also, another sign is an intelligent child cannot seem to make progress in reading and spelling, and there isn't another explanation. In this case, sometimes, it's very obvious that a student is really smart and they're working hard and they're doing everything they're supposed to, but they're just not making progress in reading and spelling. And this is a very good indicator that dyslexia should be looked into for the student. And I'm going to mention this a little bit later, actually, and provide the link, but we have a YouTube channel on Dyslexia Connect. I'm sorry, a Dyslexia Connect YouTube channel. And we have all kinds of different videos on there about dyslexia symptoms, dyslexia accommodations, how to test for dyslexia. So we'd love to have you check us out if you're interested. A lot of people find those videos to be useful. So one thing to keep in mind is that there are many combinations of symptoms of dyslexia that are possible when somebody has dyslexia. Each individual with dyslexia has a unique combination of dyslexia symptoms. Certain symptoms are common and seen in most individuals. So the thing I mentioned about the difficulty with B, D, P, and Q, that's a very common one that we see. Troubles with reading accuracy are very, very common. But there are some other dyslexia symptoms that you may see with one person who has dyslexia, but not see with another individual who has dyslexia. There are several different degrees of dyslexia. So dyslexia does not come as a one size fits all thing where somebody has this degree of dyslexia if they have dyslexia and they have all these specific symptoms. So it goes from a spectrum of mild to severe. Mild dyslexia may go unnoticed. A lot of times, students with mild dyslexia, they develop a lot of coping mechanisms to deal with their dyslexia, and a lot of people might not notice they're struggling unless they have them read out loud and maybe have them read unfamiliar words or nonsense words. Moderate dyslexia, this this may be noticed, but it often goes undiagnosed. And sometimes sometimes people think that it might be something else besides dyslexia when a student has moderate dyslexia. And there's also severe or profound dyslexia. This may be diagnosed, but sometimes the wrong intervention is given instead of an intervention that's going to work to help that student make progress. And I mentioned the Dyslexia Connect YouTube channel. There's a video about this on there if you'd like to learn more. There are also a lot of myths about dyslexia, which is really unfortunate because they often confuse a lot of people about dyslexia and lead to misunderstanding about it. So I thought I would talk about some really common myths tonight and why these are not the case. So myth number one, all children with dyslexia read and write backwards. This is not the case, actually. And in fact, it's fairly rare to have a student with dyslexia read and write um, whole sentences backwards. So we do see word reversals once in a while with small words like three-letter words, for example, and we do see letter reversals. That's pretty common, but it's very rare for a child with dyslexia to read and write backwards completely. So that typically is not a typical sign of dyslexia. Myth number two, dyslexia can be cured. Since dyslexia is neurological in origin, there isn't a cure for it in the sense that somebody can get the cure and not have dyslexia any longer. If somebody has dyslexia, they are going to have dyslexia for their whole life. Having said that, there are great methods to help individuals with dyslexia progress in reading and spelling so that they can learn to read and spell well, even though they have dyslexia. Myth three, dyslexia is an indicator of low IQ. This is completely false. There are a lot of people with dyslexia who are really, really bright. And in fact, dyslexia exists across the entire spectrum of intelligence. Myth number four, children with dyslexia just need to try harder. Lack of effort is not the issue at all. And a lot of kids with dyslexia are trying really, really hard all the time and have to work really hard to do their schoolwork and often take much longer to do their homework because it's difficult for them to read and spell. So they're working very hard typically. Myth number five, dyslexia is a vision problem. As mentioned, dyslexia is neurological, so it's not an issue with vision or the eyes. And so as a result, vision therapy is not going to help dyslexia in a student. Myth number six, dyslexia is caused by not reading enough at home. This is completely false as well. You can read a lot at home and still have a child who struggles who has dyslexia. Myth number seven, dyslexia is a catch-all term. This is false because dyslexia is actually a very specific term. And when we use it the right way and apply it correctly, we know exactly what it means and also the typical symptoms that come with it and also the remediation that works with it. And so it's not a catch-all term, it's a very specific, useful term. Myth number eight, dyslexia is uncommon. As I mentioned, it's estimated that 5 to 10% of the world's population might have dyslexia. So it's definitely not uncommon. So, how do we assess or diagnose dyslexia? Well, there are a couple of different ways to do this. So, there's what we call a formal assessment or evaluation. This is completed by a psychologist or a doctor who specializes in learning issues. And a formal assessment or diagnosis can provide an official diagnosis of dyslexia. And the case in which you might need this is perhaps if you're looking for accommodations in a certain school district for a child with dyslexia and a diagnosis is needed, or accommodations at a university, different things like that. There are also informal assessments provided, and these can be screeners provided by a local school district, or it can be evaluation provided by a tutor or tutoring company. For example, at Dyslexia Connect with the free trial we actually provide a free trial report after that trial session is done that gives parents a really good idea about where the student is currently at, where the growth areas are, where they can make progress, why they're struggling with reading and spelling. And that's a very informative thing that can give parents a really good idea of what they're looking at and what's needed to help the student make progress. Well, which one is needed? As I mentioned, a formal assessment and diagnosis may be necessary for services and accommodations in some school districts. I should mention a formal assessment and diagnosis is not needed to receive dyslexia tutoring or identify the instruction a student needs to make progress. So, we have a lot of students in our tutoring program, and I would say probably more than half of them do not have a diagnosis of dyslexia. The parents have realized that they have dyslexia because they started learning about it and saw a list of symptoms and realized that that's what was going on. And so a formal assessment and diagnosis is not needed to receive the right kind of instruction and to be able to make a lot of progress. And so one of the nice things about that actually is if a student is struggling, they can get started with instruction that will help them make progress right away. They don't need to wait for a diagnosis of dyslexia. Okay, well, we mentioned in our advertisements that we're going to be doing a raffle tonight. So we're going to be raffling off a $50 Amazon gift card to somebody who is in attendance at the webinar tonight. And the way this is going to work is that I'm going to hand it over to Katie, and Katie is going to take our list of registrants and attendees and put it in a big randomizer name picker, and then use that to choose one name to receive the gift card. And the way it will work is that she's going to spin that, pick the name, and put it in the chat. And to claim the prize, we ask that the winner respond in the chat box within 2 minutes to confirm that you're present and listening to the webinar. If we don't receive confirmation in 2 minutes, we are going to pick another name and then put that in the chat as well. So, yeah. So, Katie, are you all set to go ahead and pick the name? Okay, great. So, what we're going to do is Katie's going to do that and spin the wheel, and I'm going to continue with the presentation. And then she's going to put that name in the chat. So, be on the lookout for that if your name comes up in there. Well, so I was talking about Oscar before, my student who I worked with. How do we help students like Oscar learn to read? Well, the key is structured literacy methods, and these are sometimes referred to science of reading methods. The Orton-Gillingham approach is one of the really well-known structured literacy methods. It's been used for, I think, over 80 years now, and it's highly effective for helping kids with dyslexia and adults with dyslexia learn to read and spell. Orton-Gillingham and the methods in the Orton-Gillingham family provide an explicit, structured approach to reading and spelling. They really focus on the fundamentals and emphasize mastery. So when a student is doing tutoring in Orton-Gillingham, they learn the fundamentals and they don't move on to the next step until they've mastered those fundamentals. And in that way, they're able to make real tangible progress and make sure that they don't have any gaps in their knowledge as they're moving ahead with their reading and spelling. So, what do these methods focus on? Well, one thing they focus on is phonemic awareness. Students learn not only basic letter sounds, but also more complex letter combinations, and they learn to identify them in isolation and in the context of words. To work on them in isolation, teachers or tutors often use phonics flashcards. They also work on syllable rules. Students learn to identify and reproduce the major syllable types of English, such as the closed syllable, silent E syllable, open syllable, vowel combination, and others. Decoding skills. Students learn to apply knowledge, phonics knowledge, and syllable rule knowledge while reading words. I should mention nonsense words are tremendously useful for honing decoding skills. because when we use nonsense words, those are words that the student has not seen before. And so we're really quickly able to get a sense of whether the student knows those phonetic sounds and is able to decode that word or not. So those are very useful. Encoding skills are also taught, or spelling skills. Students learn to use knowledge of phonics and syllable rules to correctly encode or spell words. And reading fluency. Students read out loud and are monitored by their teacher or tutor while reading level appropriate materials. Reading accuracy is a struggle for students with dyslexia, especially when they have developed bad reading habits. Students will start to break these bad habits and develop good reading habits, focusing on applying their knowledge of phonics and syllable rules. So these methods, when they're applied correctly, really work and can lead to a ton of reading and spelling success. After several months of slow progress, working with Oscar, Oscar started to make really significant progress. And this was really motivating for him because he hadn't made significant progress in reading and spelling in a very long time. And once he started to see that, he was really invested in tutoring. His attitude completely changed. He was excited about learning more, and he just started to rocket ahead in his skills because he was really dedicated to the process at that point and was very happy about the progress he was making. And his reading and spelling levels continued to climb. Well, I thought we would talk about some possible school accommodations for dyslexia. We do a webinar on this during the year, specifically about accommodations, but I thought I would give some good ones tonight that we found to be really, really useful, some general ones. So, extra time on quizzes and exams. This is really helpful because often it's going to take students with dyslexia longer to read quizzes and exams. And if they are required to write responses, it's also going to take them longer to write those. So, extra time on quizzes and exams helps them to feel much calmer going into those things and will get a much better idea from the assessment of what they know by giving them more time. Allow them to not read out loud in class. Reading out loud in class can be really, really stressful for kids who have dyslexia. They may be worried that they're going to be found out by their classmates, and the classmates will realize they have trouble with reading. They may worry that they just won't be able to read the passage period that they're expected to read. And so, one of the best accommodations is to allow students with dyslexia to not read out loud in class. And this is a really big one. I've actually known some students in the past who would get so stressed out at the idea of having to read a class that they would even develop stomach aches before school and have to stay home and just not feel well. And so this is something that really helps out. Audiobooks are also great for reading assignments. Audiobooks can help a student with dyslexia read whatever the class is reading and stay up with reading assignments. And they're also great because they help kids with dyslexia stay excited about books and the idea of books while they are working to improve their own reading. Simplified, highlighted directions and instructions are really, really good. Anything that can really make it clear what the student is supposed to do for homework and for school assignments will help. For homework accommodations, step-by-step instructions are very beneficial for kids with dyslexia. Here are some additional accommodations. Printed notes about the lesson content. That's something that they can review later. It can often be hard for kids with dyslexia to take notes. And so having printed notes will help them be able to study at home. Extra time to read and write in the classroom is a great one. Examples of work done correctly. This will make assignments less overwhelming for them because they'll be able to look at an example and have a good idea of what they're supposed to do. And I should mention accommodations need to be customized to the student. You might give a student some accommodations and discover that they're maybe only using 2 out of the 5 they've been given. So it's really helpful to give them instruction about how to use those accommodations so they can take advantage of those. And then also to see which ones are really useful for them. And if they get some accommodations that aren't useful, well, those can just be removed from their IEP when it's revised, and maybe some other accommodations can be given that are useful. So it needs to be customized to the student. Well, there are a lot of strengths associated with dyslexia as well. One thing we see is that individuals with dyslexia are often highly creative in the arts. They often have creative thinking and problem solving skills. They're often gifted at seeing the big picture, and they're also often gifted with spatial reasoning tasks. If you're interested in more information about dyslexia, you can find a lot of info on our website. I just have a screenshot here of our website, dyslexiaconnects.com. And you'll notice if you look at the top here, you'll see something that says Guide to Dyslexia. If you click on that, you'll be able to get to a bunch of articles we have about dyslexia and also be able to look at our dyslexia blog, which has lots of entries about various issues pertaining to dyslexia. And I've also mentioned the Dyslexia Connect YouTube channel. We have all kinds of different videos about dyslexia on YouTube. And this is the address at the top here that you can find that at. And Katie is going to drop that in the chat as well. We have videos about dyslexia accommodations, symptoms, testing for dyslexia, and much more. So we'd love to have you check us out there if you're interested. Well, thank you very much for attending tonight. We're going to get to our question and answer session soon. As I mentioned, if you're interested in our online dyslexia tutoring, please visit us at dyslexiaconnect.com. You can find dyslexia info there as well. We'd also love to have you follow us on social media. We are very active on Facebook and Instagram, and we post graphics about dyslexia pretty much every day of the week, typically, or every weekday um, during the year. And people find those interesting and useful a lot of times. So we'd love to have you follow on us on one of those, Facebook or Instagram. And also, we announce our upcoming webinars on those channels as well. So if you check those out and follow us on there, then you should get notifications about our upcoming webinars. We have one more planned for the year, and we're very excited about those. Okay, well, I guess we can go ahead and get to some questions and comments here. Katie or Natalie, do we have any that we want to start with tonight?
Sure. Our first one is from Sarah. She is a parent of a newly diagnosed third grader. She's been in school for about a month so far, and her school and teacher are not able to support the accommodations for her daughter in school. And do we have any suggestions on how she can best support her daughter moving forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. And do we know if she has an IEP in place or
No, it
not?
doesn't say.
Okay,
She could have a 504 or an IEP.
okay,
Some schools
yeah,
will put some accommodations in place as like trial before they have an IEP or a 504. It really depends
yeah,
on the school and the district.
yeah. Would you like to share about next steps, Katie, that you would recommend due to your all your
Yes.
experience in schools?
Sarah, I was a previous special education teacher. I think in this case, there are a few things to think about here. I would think about as the parent, what's your biggest concern for your daughter? And is there one accommodation that maybe the school would be willing to implement? Sometimes when we bring new situations to a school or a district, they just say no from the get-go. And sometimes if we say, hey, can we just do this one thing? Can we try this one strategy? And if they see that that one strategy isn't that hard at the end of the day to do, they may be willing to work with you to do other things. So, for example, she probably has a spelling list, I would imagine. I would ask the teacher if there is a way she could have half the words or maybe a third of the words so that you're not adding to the teacher's plate, you're cutting back a little bit just on your daughter's expectation. That's what I would recommend. I don't know if Natalie has any other thoughts on that I might have missed.
Yeah, those are great recommendations, Katie. Yeah, would you have anything to add, Natalie?
Those are all great. I was thinking for things you can do at home while you're kind of waiting for school support to be in place. You could set up a routine for reading and homework. Have your daughter like break tasks down into small and manageable steps. Already start practicing some multisensory practice at home, so maybe tracing letters, um, And hopefully pretty soon you'll be able to get some support set up at school. But Katie has some great suggestions for that.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Natalie. Yeah, like Katie was saying, sometimes if you're able to get even one accommodation to start out with and it ends up proving that it's really effective, often when that is done and it's seen that it's making a real difference with the student, then sometimes that can lead to, more negotiations about that and ways to help that student. Yeah, that's a great question. Let's see. Do we have another one we want to maybe address out loud here?
There was another one. I'm trying to find it. I had to scroll back. Glenda is an aunt of a child that's in seventh grade, and she asked, why do teachers they don't recognize dyslexia or they don't know enough about it? And so they just keep up with the pace of their average to high achievers. And her nephew is getting kind of left behind and frustrated, and she's asking for recommendations.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Would you like to address that as well, Katie? Just what can lead
Um,
to that?
I think sometimes as a teacher, I was that first, second, third year teacher. It can be really intimidating when a parent comes and shares something with you, and you have so much information about your child that maybe the teacher can feel not quite as prepared. So, what's a way that we can prepare them? Can we share information about what you've learned about dyslexia with their teacher and say, like, I want to partner with you to make sure my child is having the best success that they can, or my nephew, whoever it may be, and having a conversation with them over the phone. I would not recommend waiting until parent teacher conferences. I would ask to have a conversation over the phone and see if you can kind of break through that barrier with that teacher. The next thing I would do is talk with the school counselor and share your concerns. There may be things that the school counselor can do, other additional supports that may be offered within the school setting as a general education student that may be beneficial as well. Sometimes teachers will offer, like, before or after school hours, they may run a study hall that the student could go and attend. There may be other ways to get them the support, even though they're not on that IEP anymore.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. Yeah, and in regards to the term dyslexia being used or not used, very often there's other terminology that's used in schools when there is a reading issue.
Mhm.
So, I believe often it's called SLD, right? Or no, is that right,
Yes.
Katie? Specific
Yes,
learning
specific
disability?
learning
Yeah. Yep.
disability.
Often
Yeah.
referred to as that. And so what that might mean if a student actually has that and has done some evaluation in school and it's determined that they have that, that could be dyslexia, but typically a lot of schools don't use the term dyslexia itself. So so that will often be wrapped up under that term, specific learning disability. And so that's kind of what comes into with the word being used or not used, and it varies from school district to school district. Some will use the term dyslexia in meetings and in paperwork. Some will not. It just depends. So yeah, thank you for your question. Let's see. Okay, look for some more questions here. Okay. Um, Oh, we have a question from Ana Ruiz. She says, hello, I am a second grade teacher. I have a student who is in preschool reading level. What letters should I start having him practice first? That's a great question. So, what we'd recommend actually is start with a limited amount of consonants. So consonants and maybe one short vowel. So don't do anything with long vowels, vowel combinations, silent E words, anything like that. Just focus on those basic fundamental sounds. And typically, when we're working with students, we'll do a limited amount of letters to begin with, and we'll add in more letters as the student is able to do that. And phonics flashcards can be really, really useful for this. And if you're using physical cards in person with a student, what you can do is just have a certain amount in the pack that you use every time you work with them, Maybe start out with five just to make sure the student can get those down and master them. And once they master those five, you can add one or two more letters in and start to gradually build up that student's phonemic awareness that way, starting very slow and focusing just on basic consonant sounds and short vowel sounds. And the nice thing is too, you can start with as small a number as you need. If the student's really, really struggling, you can start with three or four letters and progress from there because there's no reason why you have to start with all the letters of the alphabet. Actually, you can start really small and go from there.
I have something to add to that, Peter. There are
Yeah,
so
sounds
many
great.
online resources now that'll share what you call like a scope and sequence, and it'll give you the
Yeah.
beginning letters to start with. Like I know
Yep.
common ones are C, O, A, I want to say B, and maybe like E. And there's like five or six letters that will start once you put them together, will build several words, and you build
Yeah.
that. So you should be able to Google something like that and find a template just to get you started.
That's a great recommendation. And actually, we often, a lot of us who tutor or have tutored in the Orton-Gillingham method, that's what we used. We used a specific scope and sequence from Orton-Gillingham that started just like that, like Katie was mentioning. It gives the exact letters that you're teaching first. I think that there's a well-known book that's called Recipe for Reading that talks about teaching those initial sounds. That's a really great book, and they actually have a scope and sequence, I think, in the back, I believe, back cover that talks about the order that they should be taught in. So that's a handy one, and if you're looking for one. Otherwise, you could probably type in Orton Gillingham scope and sequence as well and find options like that. So it's a great recommendation. Let's see. The question from Veronica. She was asking about could I use the online tutoring sessions with my seven students at school, embed it into their timetables? Yeah, that's definitely an option, Veronica. We actually have a lot of experience working with school districts, and we're able to figure out tutoring times that work into their daily schedules so that we can work with those students when they have times available. And what's nice is that we have a lot of tutors who work for our company and a lot of flexibility. So often we are able to have those students do tutoring at times that are really convenient for them so that they're not missing out on other things in school, which is great as well. So if you're interested in that, feel free to send us an email from our website and contact form, and we'd be happy to email with you and give you more info and also set up a meeting with you if you would like to discuss that as well.
Peter, there's another great question here. Maria has a student in her class that she thinks has dyslexia, and the parents don't want to test her, and accommodations can't be in place because she doesn't have an IEP. How can we support the student? Or how can
Yeah,
she, as the teacher, support the student?
support that student. That is a great question. And I think one thing you can look at is that even if accommodations are not in an IEP for that student, you might be able to provide some accommodations for them anyway. So some basic things we mentioned, like if it's permissible to give them more time on tests, for example, and quiz without an IEP. I'm not sure that might need to be an IEP or not. I'm not sure, but different things like providing them with notes on what's being gone over in class, allowing them to not have to read in class, read out loud in class, as we mentioned, providing audiobooks when they have to do reading assignments, different things like that, providing, if it's possible, to give them less homework as well. That's a really, really good accommodation. And sometimes that needs to be in the IEP, but not always, depending on the school district. That's something that can really help the students so they don't feel as stressed out. Katie, would you have any recommendations about that?
I think I would look at, in addition to the accommodations, as Peter shared earlier in the presentation, it's really important that the instruction that Orton Gillingham provides really provides a really strong literacy foundation for all students, not just students with dyslexia. So if you're the classroom teacher and you're providing the reading instruction, I would take a look at what you're doing in your small groups with that student, and maybe you can carve out another 5 minutes to work with that student one-on-one. Maybe you're looking at just CVC words, or you're working on
Yeah.
fluency in shorter chunks. Finding ways to give that student kind of some additional attention, focusing on just the skill that they need that given day.
Yep. Thank you, Katie. That's great info. Yeah. Do you have anything to add to that, Natalie?
Well, I was going to say something about maybe pulling the student in small groups or individually if you're able to. I think
Yeah.
Katie had some great suggestions there. She can still do some accommodations like maybe some multisensory practice during the group, still breaking tasks down for the student, offer clear instructions for her.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, those are great recommendations, and those things all can really help a lot. And another benefit is the student's going to really appreciate all these things. So when they see the teacher making the effort like that, they're going to really appreciate that and value that. They're going to say like, "Wow, I'm really being seen here," and they're really making an effort to work with me, which is going to be very appreciated by them as well. Yeah, let's see. See if we have any other questions we want to go answer out loud here.
Here's another one, Peter. Laura, well, she sent it just to the hosts and panelists. Have you ever worked with a child and the OG method didn't work when they're multiple grade levels behind? She shared some additional information, but
Okay.
because she sent it to just us, I don't want to share that out.
Oh yeah. Yep.
She didn't want that in the everyone chat.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've never worked with a student who didn't make progress using OG. OG is really highly effective, and typically if the conditions are right, the student is attending instruction regularly, and there aren't big breaks in it and everything. Every time I've used it with students over the past couple of decades I've worked with students, it's worked and been really effective. I should say the rate of progress can be very different from student to student. Sometimes we'll see students who just have mild dyslexia. We'll get them started with Orton Gillingham tutoring, and they will make really fast progress, because that's basically just the key they needed to be able to really start going ahead. And they'll just be making tons of progress really quickly. On the other hand, if a student has severe dyslexia, it may take a really long time to start to see progress. I remember working with a student probably about 10 years ago, and he probably was the slowest in making progress of any student I've worked with. He had very severe dyslexia, and we were going over basic letter sounds and short vowels and things like that for probably 5 or 6 months until he started to get those down. And it certainly seemed at a couple points like, is he going to make progress? Is he not going to? But then I think at like the 7th or 8th month mark, it clicked and he started making progress. Not long after that, he mastered his short vowels, he mastered his long vowels, he started mastering the silent E words, and he just made a ton of progress. But if you had seen on a graph, it was like this, just level, and then all of a sudden drastically up. And so that was an interesting thing for me to see because that student took much longer than almost all the other students I've worked with to start making progress, but he hit that point like they all have that I've seen and started making progress. What would you say, Katie, in your experience?
I don't think I've ever met a student that didn't make progress using the Orton Gillingham approach. I will say that there are times that I have worked with students who had dyslexia, but they also had maybe something else going on that was
Yeah.
undiagnosed.
Yep.
Sometimes that was severe ADHD, or I've also worked with a student who had autism as well. So we kind of had to like mesh multiple strategies into
Yeah.
using the Orton Gillingham approach. But that's kind of the beauty of OG is that it's not just this lesson this day and you move on to your next lesson. It's
Yeah.
very detailed and individualized, and it should be to the given student. So you're looking at their skill set and kind of figuring out where are my holes at? How can I provide instruction to fill those holes? And
Yep.
so if your tutor or teacher is doing that, or if you're the teacher and you're doing that, you're doing what you need to do.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's a great point, Katie. I've worked with a lot of students too who had other issues besides dyslexia going on. I remember I worked with a student who had very bad epilepsy, and after he had a seizure, he would forget a lot of the letter sounds actually. And so we would be making some progress, and then he would have a seizure, and then we'd have to like review some of the things that he'd had mastered. With that, though, he made a lot of progress. It was just that we had to incorporate more review, and it took a little bit longer to reach a certain point. But he did make progress. But that is a factor to consider. Sometimes students who have dyslexia also have other issues that we need to look at as well that can affect progress rates. Let's see. I was going to see if there are any other questions here we want to address.
There was one that I was starting to type out, but there was a lot of information there.
Okay.
Tori asked, besides spelling, how can dyslexia show itself in a student's writing?
That is a great question. So in writing, you're often going to see a lot of signs show up that also show up when they are reading. So, for example, writing accuracy. When they're trying to write a sentence, you might see them actually leaving little words out. Like I mentioned, that's often a thing when they're reading as well, reading accuracy. So they might say, like, I'm going to write the sentence, the dog ran over to the house, but they might just type the dog over the house, for example, instead of actually putting all those words in there and connecting everything. And so that's something that we often see. And of course, you're also going to see, I think you mentioned besides spelling, but you'll see a lot of spelling as well, those spelling issues that we tend to notice. And you also might notice issues with students composing their thoughts and being able to put those down on paper. It can often be very challenging for them to decide where to start. They might get overwhelmed with the idea of having to write a sentence or especially write a paragraph or a paper, and it might be hard for them to get started, and they might have a lot of great ideas about what they want to write, but struggle with translating that to actually putting it down on the paper and writing. So those are things we tend to see. Yeah. Katie or Natalie, would you have anything to add to that at all about
I
writing?
think I would say when I was working with like third, fourth, and fifth grade students, they could ramble and tell me a really great story. And then when it
Yeah.
came time to write, all of that vocabulary kind of disappeared because they were hesitant in putting those words down because they didn't want to
Yep.
spell it incorrectly. And so if you can let your own child or your students write without immediately correcting their spelling, it gives them the opportunity to get all of that out before
Yeah.
you start criticizing. Let them start the process. Don't stop a mid thought, I guess.
That is such a great point because you'll often ask them, so what are you going to write here? And they'll have great ideas. Great ideas relating to exactly what you're asking of them.
Yeah.
And then they start to write and they just get very, very hesitant because they know every
Mhm.
time I mess up a word, somebody immediately tells me I messed it up and I got to do it again. And it leads to them being really, really shy about doing that and nervous about doing that. And so, like Katie said, if you can just let them write their story out and write what they want to write, that's going to really help before going over those spelling issues. Um, because that's going to encourage them to actually do it much more and to be excited about writing and expressing themselves in writing. Yeah, let's see. And let's Katie and Natalie, you might have answered Sarah already, but I noticed this question about dyslexic heading into high school. We are being told to move my son to a 504 instead of an IEP because the high school cannot be serviced well in high school. Are we crazy to adjust to a 504? What are your suggestions for high school accommodations that are not common in elementary and middle school? Oh, okay. And you've used our accommodations webinar for reference. Thank you for doing that. We appreciate it. Yeah. Would you have anything to mention about that, Katie?
Sarah, I think you should think about whether what services an IEP provides that your child wouldn't receive anymore if you were to switch to a 504. So in my previous district, we kind of separated IEPs and 504s by 504s being accommodations and modifications, changing the way the student was assessed or instructed, whereas an IEP changes the instructional level. So if your child just needs more time for tests, maybe alternative space to work, a 504 could work. But if your child needs additional instruction than what they're receiving in their general education classroom, I would recommend sticking with an IEP. Um, I don't think a school can tell you that they won't put those things into place. I could be wrong about that. Um, but you don't have to agree to a 504 because ultimately you're the parents and you decide what's best for your child in that situation. You can take their recommendations, but you don't have to go along with it.
Yeah, and as far as dyslexia accommodations go, it's fortunate because a lot of the accommodations that work for elementary or middle schoolers are also great for high schoolers. They're
Yeah.
sort of just great across the board. Like Katie was mentioning, more time on tests, and quizzes, printed out notes of the course material. And this can be particularly useful in high school because, of course, they're dealing with many more complex subjects and a lot more information in every class period. So if the teacher can provide printed notes about what they've gone over, that not only makes it easy for the student to study at home, but it also makes it really easy for parents or tutors to help the student study, which is really, really great because I remember when I used to tutor and help students with homework, I always appreciated when we had those handouts because sometimes the student would have trouble telling me exactly what they were working on or what they were supposed to be doing. And if I saw a handout, I could think, oh, perfect, I know exactly what this is about and help them with that. So yeah, so that's a great question. So accommodations, general dyslexia accommodations that help at all the levels are good for high school as well, typically. Yeah, great. Well, I think we'll go ahead and wrap things up here today. So thank you so much to everybody for attending tonight. This was such a great webinar, and I really appreciate you taking time out of your schedules to attend. I just love doing these webinars and being able to talk about dyslexia. And we really appreciate you coming tonight. We hope that you'll be able to join us for the next webinar as well, which is on October 15th, the dyslexia simulation. And thank you so much to Katie and Natalie for helping to answer questions as well. Great to have you here tonight. And I hope to see everybody for the next webinar. Thank you so much and hope you have a great evening. Bye bye.